I got a Baker! Woo!
What's up, Yins guys? Welcome back to Fishing PA with Ryan Reed. In this episode, I want to talk about the little adventure that Dan and I had yesterday as we traveled out west to attend the Ohio Musky Show. Now, the Ohio Musky Show was held at the Makoy Center in Hillard, Ohio, which for us is about a 3.5-hour drive from western Pennsylvania. Now, I was super pumped, super excited, super stoked to attend the Ohio Musky Show this year for a couple of reasons. Number one being, this is the kickoff to the 2019 show season. These are the opportunities where we can go out, talk to professionals, talk to vendors, talk to guides, really talk about technical fishing information and obtain information that's going to help us learn something new. In addition to that, this is our opportunity to get out to these shows and talk to some lure makers. And really, for the Ohio Musky Show, this was my opportunity as a Western Pennsylvania angler to travel out there and talk to vendors like Shad and Alley Cat and take a look at their product. Now, as most musky fishermen would agree, the musky industry is somewhat of a cult following. And with that, these shows are absolutely critical to us to kind of get through winter. Again, this is our opportunity to get out there, meet new people, and really talk about the sport of musky fishing. So I encourage you guys, if you're looking to get into the sport, these shows are a great starting point for you. This is how I started a few years ago with Musky Max. And really, it's helped me learn, it's helped me grow as an angler, and it's helped me meet new fishermen that are absolutely fantastic people. And much of the same happened this year in Ohio. Now, before I get too far down the rabbit hole, it's worth me mentioning, I am sick as a dog right now. I tried my best to get through the show, and really, I spent most of my time talking to vendors and trying to knock off the 7 lures that were on my list. So I apologize to you guys. I did not get the amount of video that I wanted to get to kind of show off the Ohio Musky Show. I'm sure others will take video of the show and post it on YouTube, so hopefully you guys can see that. But for now, I have a few short snips and also some pictures that will kind of help you guys see what these shows are all about. Alright guys, so general admission was about $10 for the day, $20 for the weekend. Excellent pricing, and as always, Tony Grant and Greg Thomas do a fantastic job with this show. Anywhere from setting things up to the floor plan and the layout and the vendor list, it's just a fantastic show. So for $10, you guys can be a part of the Ohio Musky Show. Alright guys, let's take a few minutes to talk about the vendor list. There were a tremendous amount of vendors at this list, and there were a lot of big names. Some of the top lure vendors were Thorn Brothers, Team Rhino Outdoors, Fat AZ, Lungin Lures, Shad, and the Zachary Baker. Now, some honorable mentions with regards to lure companies: Musky Train and Tough Shad, Chaos Tackle, Musky Innovations, Spanky and Ziggy Baits, Shum Shum, and Alley Cat. Now, one vendor I want to talk about in particular is Trucker Lures. This gentleman is out of Wisconsin, so I haven't really seen his baits yet. The baits are very interesting to me because of the profile. So you guys should check out Trucker Lures and see what they have to offer, because I think their baits are going to be really good, and they're not really in the mainstream. Now, some other cool vendors that were at the show kind of included Musky Bumper, Figure 8 Apparel, Outdoor Grips, and Stealth Tackle. So it's kind of cool just to look at this show and realize that there's not just lure vendors there. There's certain product that you guys can get at these shows that will help you throughout the entire year. Now, with Greg Thomas and Tony Grant now owning Musky Hunter, this gives you an opportunity to check out their booth, renew your subscription, and check out all their gear that they brought to the show. As always, you guys have an opportunity to talk to Musky's Inc. And the Musky's Inc. booth was there and available, and they are accepting new members. Now, just for a minute, I want to talk about some of the guides, because guide service is an important aspect to an outdoor show. Now, in the musky world, Spencer Berman, Jason Quintano, and Mike Holbert are the 3 big names when it comes to fishing Lake St. Clair. Now, as far as Cave Run goes, Greg Thomas, Tony Grant, and Crash's Landing were all there at the show and available to talk about guide services on Cave Run. Now, as far as my favorite guide here at the Ohio show, it's absolutely Muddy Creek Fishing Guides with Vance and Todd. Now, Muddy Creek is probably my favorite guide service just in general, and it has to do with the type of people that Todd and Vance are. These guys are not only guides and they're very good at what they do, but they really spend a lot of time with their clients. They provide useful information and they really teach you a lot through the Fat AZ podcast. So that was a huge highlight for me this year at Ohio, was really spending some time with Muddy Creek and Fat AZ throughout the show. All right, so instead of kind of reviewing or breaking down the show any further, I just really wanted to share with you guys the experience that Dan and I had this year at the Ohio show. So first and foremost, let me just tell the story. Dan and I left my house approximately at 6:30 in the morning. Now, we wanted to leave a little bit early because we wanted to have the opportunity to get in line and stand in line to hopefully buy a Baker bait. Now, you guys know, I mentioned this before, Zachary Baker, his lures are very coveted. Now, Zachary Baker is really an awesome individual. I watched him, how he talked to people, how he treated people, how he thanked his customers. He's very genuine. He's a really nice guy, and he's really immersed in the musky world. So Zach, first and foremost, I just want to thank you for the opportunity in Ohio to purchase one of your baits. Now, it was really exciting to me to kind of get in the car and head out this early to get in line because Dan and I really hadn't had an opportunity to do this at any of the other shows. We've seen the Baker bait sell out within 20 minutes. We saw it at Musky Max. We've seen it elsewhere. So there was a little bit of tension, in the morning, just trying to get out and a little bit of anxiety to hurry up and get out there. So we left early, we got breakfast, we headed out, and we finally get to the venue. So we pull up, and we notice there's a couple other cars in the parking lot. And it turns out these other guys that were in the parking lot would later kind of become really our Zach Baker ferrymen, if you will, trying to explain the process and what to expect and how it's going to handle and what we should look for. So, really, I'm not going to mention any names, but there were two individuals, that got to the venue right after us. And basically, they were just really awesome people. I really enjoyed talking to them. We got to kind of exchange information, exchange stories. It was just really cool to pass that X amount of hours you kind of wait until the show starts. So I also met one gentleman that is actually one of my neighbors, very close by to me. He pulled in right beside me, and I had the opportunity to meet him, and then I realized how small of a world it is and really how small that musky community is as well. So we get inside, we're kind of sitting there. So to make a long story short, Tony Grant comes up to Dan and I, and he says, "Hey, how would you guys like free admission?" And we say, "Yes, please. What can we do?" So Tony brings out giant bags of rattle baits. He says, "You guys sit here." He dumps the rattle baits on the table. He dumps his glide baits on the table. Now, he also dumps a pile of split rings and a pile of hooks. And he gives us split ring pliers. And he says, "Here, boys, hook them up." So for about an hour and a half to 2 hours, Dan and I sat there and put together Tony Grant's rattle baits, at least put the split rings and the hooks on them. So I got to tell you, I was super excited to help Tony. I thought this was just a cool opportunity for me to kind of help him as well as pass the time, because we have like 3.5 to 4 hours that we're just sitting there waiting for the show to start. So we ended up doing these baits, getting them all done. So Tony ended up giving us one of his lures for free. So it really worked out. I was super pumped. I got an awesome glide bait from Tony, and I got to help him before the show started. So now we got about 2 hours until the show starts. So it's about noon. The show starts at 2. So we got people that are kind of flooding in now and pushing forward. So we're talking, and probably about a half hour before the show started, Zach Baker comes out and he says, "Hey, who was the first one in line?" So naturally, I think all of us up front kind of pointed at Dan because he was the first one. So Zach came out and hands Dan one of his 7.5-inch crankbaits. So Dan, he's a little hard of hearing sometimes, so he didn't necessarily know what was going on at first. And, after we told him, like, Zach basically came out, thanked us for coming out early, being in line to buy his baits. I just thought that was so genuine, and I just thought it was such a nice thing to do from Zach's standpoint. He gave Dan this bait. It's an awesome color, 7.5 inch, and it's really just a coveted bait. And his way of saying thank you was to give this to Dan. So once Dan realized what was going on, it was like, holy crap, I just got a Baker for free. So this was awesome, because this kind of started, this kind of boosted my anxiety level at this point, because now the adrenaline's really pumping. We got people pushing in, we got Zach giving baits, we got 30 minutes till go time, and it was just a crazy experience when that happened. So, I'm thinking about Tony, I'm thinking about meeting these guys, and I'm thinking about Zach coming out and doing that. And then we kind of start getting to that 10-minute countdown. And here Tony is, telling us, he's like, you guys need to calm down. Everybody needs to calm down. And, in the last couple of events, things have happened around Baker's booth. Like, people are getting elbowed. Little kids are getting pushed up against the rack. It's a bear to get to this booth to get some of these baits. So, this is my first experience with it. So I'm really anxious. I'm starting to get nervous. And, the really interesting thing is, Tony makes an announcement. He says, all right, we're going to do this. Everybody calm down. Make sure you walk, no running. I don't want any pushing. I don't want any shoving. He lays the groundwork. So he calms us all down. Well, at this point, I had already been texting Deanna about possibly buying a Baker. I've been talking to these guys. I've finally committed. I'm like, I'm committed. If I get to the booth, I'm committed. I'm going to buy a bait. So, these guys are all talking me into it, and we're in the elevation and anxiety level at this point, with 3 minutes before the show started, is through the roof. I'm at a point where I'm shaking. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. I've never experienced this at an outdoor show. So I look at Dan, and he's like, my heart's beating so fast, I can't even. So this is why we do it, right? I mean, this is why we as musky anglers do this. This is a very sought after bait. So, boom, gun goes off, 2 o'clock. Tony's yelling, everybody calm down. So very gently, we all walk around to Baker's booth, and we notice there's like 4 people that like just ran right into the booth from the other side. So these guys had run all the way around to get there. Well, thankfully, Zach and his helper were like, hey, who was first? So the gentlemen that were kind of talking with us, the 2 kids, they had spoke up. They said, basically they were first, we're next, and that set the table. I was able to get my 7.5 inch Goldie, and those 2 gentlemen were able to pick up their baits respectfully. So, the process, when you get to the booth, immediately everybody jams into the booth. And I noticed that I got kind of pinned with the 2 other gentlemen behind Dan, and 4 other people were kind of reaching in and reaching over and trying to grab these baits and really pushing us up against the rack. Well, I looked up, and Dan had been pushed up against the rack, and he had a bait hooked to him on his shirt. So they're trying to unhook him. People are coming in. Zach is, trying to stop everybody, and he says, politely, hey, I'd really like to ask you guys to just 1 or 2 baits, make sure everybody gets an opportunity. I am so thankful that he did that, because this allowed everybody that got to the show early an opportunity to pick up at least 1 or potentially 2 of Zach Baker's baits. Now, after this happened, I took my Goldie, I got out of Dodge, I met up with Dan, and we were able to celebrate before we moved on to the next booth. All right, guys, I just want to show you guys a few of my pickups for 2019, and these are baits I'm going to be fishing probably a lot locally into New York and up into Canada when we actually head out on our Canada trip. Now, I'll give you guys, for example, my top 5 bait makers that I was trying to get to at the Ohio show. Number 1, I already showed you this, but the Zachary Baker Goldie in the 7.5. This was my number 1 targeted bait. I did not honestly think I was going to have a crack at it. I did not believe in my heart that I was going to get it, but it worked out, and I ended up with 1 in my box. Now, number 2 was the Boss Shads. Now, Boss Shad, they're a little bit easier to get. However, again, I didn't want to order them online. This was an opportunity for me, so I picked up the regular or the original Boss Shad, which I believe is 4.5 inches. This is in the Chautauqua sucker pattern, so pretty cool color there. And then also, which is the theme of this show for me this year, was the Goldie pattern. So there is the Boss Shad Goldie pattern. Now, I really wanted to put a focus this year on 22 longs and 22 shorts. So I was able to do that. Team Rhino, awesome. Awesome booth. Those guys kill it every single time I place an order. I love their YouTube stuff. Check out Team Rhino. They have this custom Goldie pattern in the 22 long. Hopefully you guys can see that okay. Just a sick, awesome color in that product. Really heavy rattle on these. Great baits. But I was able to pick that guy up in the short as well. I'm planning to take this guy to Canada and drop some devastation on those Canadian pike. In addition to that, Dan actually picked this one up for me. This is new this year. This is a 22 short shallow model. Now, if you guys notice the bill here, the regular short has a bill like that. The shallow short has a bill like that. So they're two different bill styles. This is going to run shallow. This is going to be really good for over top of weeds, and this is going to be really good for outflows and river systems as well in some of those deeper holes. One other thing I want to mention here is I did pick up one additional short, 22 short directly from Lungin, and this is the Boss Shad pattern. This is actually bourbon. So that color right there is custom Boss Shad painted, and it's painted in the bourbon pattern. It's got a lot of awesome glitter. It's got the orange and the black and that goldish pattern. I think that's going to be a killer bait for this year, and that's really a good color for Canada as well. I'll show you guys quickly my free Tony Grant glide bait. I kind of picked up this pattern here. I wanted to see it in the walleye. This is kind of a good pattern in general. Kind of looks like a carp or a walleye pattern with that gold and the black. Awesome, awesome action. That's a much larger version of the fat belly that I talk about, which is this. So when you guys see Tony Grant, check those glide baits out. They're really awesome for pike, and they're really good over weeds. You control those bad boys as well. Lastly, really from a vendor standpoint, you know, we talked about Lungin, we talked about Baker, we talked about Boss Shad. One of the other bait makers that I was really interested in going to find and to pick out baits for was Fat AZ. Now, we talked about their jerk baits. We've talked about the podcast. Those guys are fantastic guys. You know, Todd and Vance, they're just great fishermen. And you know what? They're great human beings too, because they're willing to talk to you and share information and teach you new things. And I love the podcast. They're hilarious. And Andy does such a great job overall running the podcast, keeping those guys in line, and he offers some really solid information. And the other thing about Andy is, technically speaking, he's super talented when it comes to making rod holders and painting baits, and you can just see that he's a technical person, and that's really to your advantage when you guys are looking for rod holders and looking for products like that. So again, Fat AZ baits. I got the Raptor in their show color this year, which was 3 Mile Perch. Dan and I had both asked him if he could make this for the show, and he actually did. So a lot of people were looking for this color. This is a sweet color. It's got the orange on the bottom. And in addition to that, the Mud Puppy. His Mud Puppy pattern is fantastic. You guys get a good look at that. You can see the shine in it. You can see the pattern. This is just a killer color, and I think this 6-inch is going to be dynamite up in Canada. Now, they say to use the 6-inch model in the springtime and go to that 8-inch model, you know, for everything else. I like the 6-inch profile a lot. I think it works for me. I think I can catch bass on that too. You know, so I kind of want to go with the 6s and see how it goes. I might venture into some 8s later on, but the 8s have a much thicker profile, and they just look fantastic. So when you guys get an opportunity, check out Fat AZ Raptors. They have soft tails, they have some soft plastics, but they got that Raptor jerkbait, which is neutrally buoyant. It's a great product. It's really easy to work actually too, and it's going to give you guys an advantage when you're dealing with weedy lakes like Chautauqua. All right, guys, I've talked a tremendous amount about the Ohio Musky Show. Point being, it's a fantastic opportunity for you guys to get out there, talk to some vendors, talk to some guides, take a look at some new products. There was a ton of product there. Thorn Brothers, Team Rhino, they had all sorts of products, nets, rods, rod holders. They had lures out the wazoo. So it was just a fantastic opportunity for you guys to get out there and talk to those types of vendors, as well as check out some of the local bait makers in your area, like Boss Shad and Alley Cat, as well as Zachary Baker, which was a huge plus for Ohio this year. So again, take some time, take a look at these shows, invest in the $10 to go out, get involved in the musky community, take a look at some of this stuff, talk to some of these awesome people that are out there and learn something new, especially when it's as freaking cold as it is outside today. So with that said, if you guys like this video, go ahead and hit that like button for me. If you guys like the content overall, please subscribe to my channel. I greatly appreciate it. Tight lines. See you next time.